how do I be a healer? How do I make a difference in this very broken and chaotic world that we live in today? And that was the draw.
Paging Dr. Cook. Paging Dr. Cook. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR.
Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Prescription for Success. I'm Dr. Randy Cook, your host for the podcast, which is a production of M.D. Coaches, providing leadership and executive coaching for physicians by physicians to overcome burnout, transition your career, develop as a leader, or whatever your goal might be. Visit M.D. Coaches on the web at mymdcoaches.com because you're not in this alone. And don't forget that CME credit is available when you listen with us. Just look for CMify in the show notes to learn how. My guest today has a really interesting and I think inspirational story, beginning as a Catholic sister in the Order of Dominica and currently serving as Director of Spiritual Care and Education at Carolina's Medical Center Mercy, part of the Atrium Health System in Charlotte, North Carolina. So let's hear my conversation with Terri Bolotin. I am really excited today to be speaking to a fairly unique guest. Terri Bolotin, thank you so much for being here with us today. I am really looking forward to this conversation.
Well, thanks, Randy. I'm delighted to be here with you. I've had great experiences with physicians in my work over the years, and I'm glad to be in this platform with you.
Well, I always enjoy hearing from a non-physician, and we're going to do a lot of that today. As is always the case, Terri, I like to begin at the beginning, as they did in Alice in Wonderland, and talk about your beginnings. In your CV, I have everything starting with your undergraduate degree at St. Mary's, but I'd like to know a little bit more about your earlier life. How did you happen to decide to get into the ministry? What was your family life like? Where did you grow up? Those kinds of things. So fill us in.
Okay. Well, I grew up in the south suburbs of Chicago in a very homogeneous suburb that was filled with people who were white and Catholic and middle class. It was a very stable, very loving environment. And one of the things that happened to me was just a curiosity about what was different than my experience. I think there was something that was so homogeneous that I wanted to find out what else was there.
Was there anything in particular? I hate to interrupt, but that's such a profoundly unusual thing, I think, because so many of us grow up and think our immediate world is kind of the world, but you were able to see beyond that at a fairly early age, it sounds like.
Yeah, probably my parents kind of wondered if they wished I would have another way of looking at it. But there is something about the kind of security that I had. I also had an uncle that was a Catholic priest, and he went to kind of mission territory. He ended up going to a small island in Panama because he heard that was where some of the need was greatest. And yeah. I think there was something in my family history. And I believe that there's also something about the generations that come before us. And although it was certainly well before my life, my great-grandparents were from the border of either it was Ukraine or Russia, and they were Jewish, and they would have left in the 1880s during the pogroms of the time. And so what happens to people and the kind of generational trauma of people who, because of the faith that they are born into, experience something that is profoundly kind of life-changing forever. And although that certainly is a story in my history, I think that somehow those kind of stories get into. And then on the other side of the family was kind of the Irish immigrants who left during the potato famine and, at 15 and 16 years old, got on a boat and never saw their family again. Mm-hmm. And so those stories, which are so many of the immigrant stories of our country, I think they were in my blood somehow. even
Yeah.
unconsciously.
Well, it's very interesting. And so with that background, what did you have in mind, if anything, when you matriculated at St. Mary's College in Notre Dame, Indiana?
A lot of what I had in mind as I'm a young person in the 1970s and 80s was a kind of intensity about the whole concept of truth, not as an abstract, but of truth as in a way of living and a way of finding meaning. And that for me, the making of sense and some kind of meaning of what was going on in the world was a primary piece. There was a lot of things going on in Central America at the time. There was the assassination of a bishop, and there was also the killing of missionaries. Who those stories became kind of important stories to my own history of, if I was going to make a difference in the world, I needed to make a choice to live with intention. At that point, I was very much interested in what in the Catholic world of Catholic religious life of living as a sister, that was the thing that appealed to me, because it was a sense of a greater mission. And, we're talking really, you're talking mostly to physicians. I think the idea of being a healer, which I hear from so many young physicians getting into the field, was also something that was part of my desire. How do I be a healer? How do I make a difference in this very broken and chaotic world that we live in today? And that was
those are some really deep thoughts for a college kid. I got to tell you that my thoughts were not that deep when I was 18 years old. You got any idea what made you different? And I think you were kind of a standout among your peers, if what I'm hearing is correct.
I hesitate to really claim much of that sense of a standout. I think each of us in the moment that we lives according to the light that we have in that moment. My tendency has always been to go deep. If I can go deep, that's just more fun to me. What gives us meaning at different points in life, that has changed over the years, but the interest in kind of digging underneath. Of course, people who sometimes have conversations with me, that can be a little troublesome, because that interest in what's underneath this, like, Randy, if the shoe was on the other foot, I would want to know, what is it about you? What has gotten you into this? Those are such interesting stories.
Yeah. Well, I understand that, and that's why I really enjoy doing this podcast. But as I say, when I was 18, I don't think I was anywhere close to that level of consciousness, and I'm really fascinated with people who come into that at such an early age as you did. And once you got in place at St. Mary's, did you feel like you were in exactly the right place and really excited about it?
There's something about study that has always been a delight for me. There's something that is life-giving that opens up whatever, either relationships or content. And I love to study it. The whole field of theology was fascinating to me. In my day, and even now, there's a sense that theology is something that is kind of a systematic thing, that you look at the understanding of the big concepts around life, death, salvation, all those kind of things. I was never as interested in that field of theological study, but I liked the writings of those who were the mystics. And in every religion, there are always people who take a certain intensity in their religion. And whether it's the mystics in Christianity, whether it's the Sufis in Islam, I mean, every religious tradition has their people who kind of just jump deep into it. And that was very interesting to me. I've never been attracted by the person who was considered to be the smartest in the room, but I've always liked the person who was the most curious, who seemed to have the best questions.
Are you a doctor struggling to provide the best care for your patients while dealing with financial and caregiving matters out of the scope of your practice? Do you find yourself scrambling to keep up with the latest resources and wish there was an easier way? Then this virtual caregiver conference resource will save you time, money, and sanity by giving you all the resources and information your patients need in one place. This conference helps you and your patients enlist the best strategies around healthcare resources and the best financial steps for your patients while navigating caregiving situations. You don't have to go home feeling frustrated and helpless because you couldn't connect your patients with the best services. Find out more at jeanniedoherty.com or click in the link in the show's notes. You don't want to miss this caregiver resource.
Hi, I'm Rhonda Crow, founder and CEO for M.D. Coaches. Here on RX for Success, we interview a lot of great medical professionals on how they grew their careers, how they overcame challenges, and how they handle day-to-day work. I really hope you're getting a lot of great information. But if you're looking for an answer to a specific problem, management or administration challenge, or if you're feeling just a bit burnt out, like maybe you chose the wrong career, well, then there's a faster way to get the help you need. No, it's not counseling, it's coaching. RX for Success is produced by M.D. Coaches, a team of physicians who have been where you are. I know you're used to going it alone, but you don't have to. Get the support you need today. Visit us at mymdcoaches.com to schedule your complimentary consultation. Again, that's mymdcoaches.com, because you're not in this alone.
We'll get back to our interview in just a moment, but right now I want to tell you a little bit about Physician Outlook. If you haven't discovered this remarkable magazine, please do so very soon. It was created by physicians, for physicians, to showcase the intersection between clinical and non-clinical interests. Whether it's writing, painting, cooking, politics, and dozens of other topics, Physician Outlook gives a physician perspective. It's available online and in print. It's really unique among physician lifestyle magazines. And like the Prescription for Success podcast, Physician Outlook amplifies the voice of any physician who has something to say. It also engages patients who still believe in physician-led, team-based care. And Prescription for Success listeners can get 3 months free when you enter our promo code RX for Success and select the monthly option at checkout. That's a really great deal on this stunning publication. And now let's get back to today's interview. So let's talk about when you got your baccalaureate degree at St. Mary's, you got busy and you did a whole lot of different things. Is that because you just wanted to explore, or were you just trying to find your way?
Yeah, I think a certain restlessness. And as a high school teacher, I mean, I taught in an all-girls Catholic high school in the south suburbs of Chicago. And again, there was some restlessness. I was teaching religion to high school kids. And in some ways, high school kids are just a blast. They have all the questions, and it was a lot of fun. And yet I started to wonder if I really believed what I was teaching. So I was like, if I'm gonna teach this stuff and it has any credence at all, then I need to go see if I can actually live it. And so I had some connections, and I moved into what was considered one of the most dangerous parts of the city of Chicago.
Wow.
And it was a high murder rate. And it was a house where people had chosen to live there to work among some very poor folks in the neighborhood and to offer adult education as well as English as a second language. So on one side of the street, it was mostly Mexican immigrants who needed to learn English. The other side was mostly African Americans who were often people who were part of the Great Migration. And the people who I taught as like a 26-year-old, I mean, I was a kid, and I'm teaching them to read. And these are women who had grown up in sharecropping experiences in the South and who had been treated with such indignities, and yet had really kind of come forward with such a great sense of both presence, a claiming of their own agency, of their right as human beings to not be treated like that ever again. And I do remember even now hearing those stories and thinking, I have so much to learn, and that these people are my teachers. They have no degrees. They were just learning to read. And yet there was something profound that they had to offer me. That was, in some ways, one of the most meaningful couple years of my life because of the reversal in both my privilege as kind of this young, educated white person and the experience of many of the people in the neighborhood there. And I have to say, it was one of my first experiences working very closely with physicians. We had a relationship with some wealthy folks in the suburbs, and they often would do pro bono work for us. And so we had a number of women who were having some recommendations for procedures and had some real concerns and felt like they had no one to ask for help. And so we had physicians who offered to do some pro bono second opinions for us. In that time, this is just shameful to kind of consider this even now, but that there were a number of women who had been recommended for hysterectomies. And the physician who saw these women after seeing it was more than one. And he was just kind of shocked. He's like, these women absolutely do not need a hysterectomy. But it was some of the kind of corruption of the system that people got paid for those kind of procedures. So we were really fortunate to have such good partners who stepped in and partnered with us.
That's really interesting. I'd like to know just a little bit more about that now. So these recommendations for unnecessary surgery were coming from physicians who were making themselves available to this population, but yet they were being remunerated for it. Is that basically what we're talking about?
Yeah, it was kind of Medicaid funded, procedures, and sometimes when you hear of people making money off such things, that seemed like that was what was happening. It was some county offices that people would tend to go to, and they often didn't have any recourse. So the fact that they were able to get a second opinion, which would not have normally kind of been easily attainable.
Yeah. Did that experience in any way color your subsequent attitudes and experiences in the healthcare system, which we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but did it give you an attitude about the healthcare system in America as we know it at that time, at that early period in your life?
Well, it certainly raised a kind of surprise because I had, in my own personal experience, I had limited need for healthcare and more in the preventative world. And so I had generally positive experiences. But I think there was the both and, because I also had worked with these physicians who were doing the second opinions and saw some of the best of providers.
Yeah. So you were at least able to understand that there were people who were in it for the right reason, even if there were some bad apples here and there.
Certainly. Yes.
Well, that's good.
Yes.
It sounds like you were willing to have an open mind about it, and that's always a good thing. Eventually, you found your way to extending your education a bit at the Candler School in Atlanta at Emory University. How did that come about?
Well, as I did end up joining the Sisters of the Dominican Sisters of Sinsinawa, which is a Catholic religious order, and as part of that, I did further education. And one of the things that you did was you kind of went far and wide. There was a sense of to go out where the work was great and difficult. And although Emory was certainly a wonderful place to work, I lived in community with people who were with a group of Dominicans in Atlanta. Mm-hmm. Many of whom, one of them was actually a chaplain at Grady Hospital, which she had the best stories of the emergency department at Grady, which is a pretty busy one, and it certainly gave me an interest in what life in a hospital might be like. My work was with campus ministry, and that again was a whole bunch of fun. There is something about the energy of young people asking questions about life and trying to figure out what they're going to do. That was what I did for a number of years, and then I got myself in a little bit of trouble with the Catholic Church, and I was a little too ecumenical in terms of just wanting everybody to be welcome to the table.
Yeah.
And so sometimes that doesn't go so well, depending on your institutional system that you're part of. And it was time for me to do something a little different. And I did. I worked for the university a little bit with their volunteer program, which was part of a big emphasis at Emory. At the same time, because the CDC is right there in Atlanta, had lots of relationships with some of the folks who worked at CDC and just really interesting kinds of research opportunities. So it was a lively time to learn about what was going on in the world.
I was a little bit surprised when I saw in your CV that you had decided to further your education at Emory, and you did very well. You graduated magna cum laude with a Master of Divinity, but I was a little surprised because it is not only not a Catholic institution, it is officially a Methodist institution.
You're right. You're right, Randy. Yeah.
Well, just tell me a little bit about the thought process that went into that. Was there any trepidation at all? Were you excited about it? Were you curious about it? Where was your head?
For whatever reasons, I am interested in what is outside of what is familiar for me. And I went to Emory as a Catholic campus minister, but many of the professors at Emory were very interesting, were very challenging. One of the professors that became a close friend, her focus was on the early church mothers and fathers. And she was the first woman to graduate from Oxford with a theological degree. And her stories were about how the ancient wisdom often spoke to her in the most contemporary of times. And for me, that's one of the truths that I found in my graduate study, is that sometimes it is the ancient voices that speak kind of through the years, and that relying just on whatever is most current really shuts off lots of wisdom that is available out there. So I think getting to know some of the faculty members, and I think I didn't want to be I had many years of Catholic education. I felt like it was time to begin to be a little more expansive. Emory was a great place to be.
Yeah, it sounds like you had a good experience there. And I'm trying to get you into the Charlotte area. What brought that about?
So I did decide that I was not going to continue to be a sister. I decided that as much as that had been a meaningful phase of my life, that I wanted to kind of expand beyond that particular lifestyle. I had been challenged and changed by the kind of sense of pursuit of truth, which is a very important part of the charism or the spirit of the Dominican Sisters. And that continues to be a formative part of my life. But there was a sense of I needed to take another path. At that point, there was another road that I needed to travel. So I interviewed at residencies for CPE, which is clinical pastoral education, much like medical residencies, that once you have the academic education, you can do a residency in a hospital. And I thought this would be a chance to begin a new moment. And the place that I interviewed for was one of at that point, it was known as the second busiest trauma center between Atlanta and Washington, D.C. So I thought, this sounds like a place that would have lots of good educational opportunities. And there were good educators there. People I interviewed with, I was very impressed by. So that took me away from kind of my life as a Dominican sister and into a hospital for the first time, really. I remember coming into what was then Charlotte Memorial Hospital and thinking, I don't know, I've never been. I mean, hospitals are they smell different. Although I'd have to say this, there were no smells at Charlotte Memorial. They were very good about, they were really insistent about this being a very clean, non-hospital looking place. But I
have a feeling there were
familiar
smells there. It sounds like they were very meticulous about cleaning it up promptly, but that's
yes,
an interesting story, and I apologize for the interruption. So,
no,
go ahead.
No, Randy. Once I was there for a while, I did find other smells.
Oh, you found the smells?
Yes, you can't be there for too long without finding some smells.
That's true. So more about that. You are now officially in the territory that caused me to be interested in you. You're in the healthcare system. Tell me some more about your first impressions and how you happened to become engaged with what was going on in our world.
The thing that I remember in the first kind of months of being in a hospital was both how foreign it was, that there were all kinds of rules about how rounds went. I mean, there are the implicit rules, the unspoken rules in terms of who speaks first, what kind of things you'll talk about, the acronyms. Now, I'm so used to acronyms now, but the acronyms, one of the things that our educators encouraged us to do is really just to spend some time writing down all the things that were totally unfamiliar to us, because we needed to create ourselves a bit of a bibliography, or not a bibliography, but a dictionary of healthcare terms. So that was unfamiliar. Also, my first assignment was to the oncology units. And so the amount of death that I experienced in my first 6 months was quite, it was an education unlike any other. And the difference in terms of both the most sensitive of providers giving such news, and then occasionally the providers that I remember being on call in the emergency department, and a provider would come in and very quickly give news of a death and be out the door. And it was a reminder of what the cost is for any of us who do this. And even the people who would quickly be in and out the door, I think there's a sense of this is not a normal thing that any of us do. I mean, you as providers, this is not normal for you guys to do this either. But for some reason, we stay in this space where there is suffering and death. We keep coming back to it.
Yeah, that is a really profound insight. It's something that has confounded me a bit in recent years when I came into the practice of medicine. And of course, I was not a primary care provider. I was a surgeon, and I dealt with a lot of fatal diseases, and I dealt with death a lot. And one of the things that I remember particularly about my early years, and something that I find to be disturbingly absent today, is that there were so many physicians and surgeons that were with their patients right up until the moment they died. What I see today is profoundly different. Very few primary care providers, at least to what I'm exposed to, don't do that. When their patients go to the hospital, they stay in their they stay in their offices, and their patients are being cared for many times by physicians and surgeons that they've never seen before. And they leave the earthly life and the care of people that they're not very familiar with. And this is a little disturbing to me. And I'm wondering if that means anything to you. Am I just having concerns over something that doesn't really matter, or do you think I'm onto something?
Well, I certainly hear this from our patients who talk about not seeing, about not knowing the provider, and that provider also will change if they're in the hospital for a number of days or weeks sometimes,
or sometimes in a single day. These people are working on shifts,
right? And yet, I've also heard from primary care doctors who talk about with some relief not having to go out to the hospital at all hours of the day and night. I had an OBGYN friend who said he was just so grateful at a certain point in his life not to have to go out for deliveries. And because there is something about the connection. To me, it's a really sacred connection between one's healthcare provider, because there is such a sense of vulnerability that people feel when they're ill or when they're uncertain about their health. And there is this sense that this provider is going to be the person that might be able not to just know, but then they will be the one to talk with me. They'll be the one to hear. And if they can do that well, then there's a real healing that people have when they have a provider that can stay there with them.
Well, I think that brings us to a good segue into the opportunity to talk about what you're doing right now. I had never heard of clinical pastoral education until I read your CV.
Yeah. Right.
I'm delighted to know that it's going on.
Well,
so tell me about how that came into being, and just exactly what is your place in that role.
Well, and it's interesting. I was thinking that we're about at 100 years of the kind of formation of this organization. And it was started by a physician who felt like there was a need for more kind of case study experiences and to bring people in ministry in as part of the multidisciplinary team. And this physician, I think he was the head of Mass General back in the 1920s, teamed up with a minister who himself had some kind of mental health breakdown. And this minister did some real study on the relationship between religion and mental illness. And we certainly know now that there are plenty of ways that religion can have toxic effects. That there's certain ways that when religion is poorly practiced, that it has a very negative health impact, as well as having a potentially meaningful, life-giving, sustaining one. So what the training in my organization does is kind of interesting to think about it, is that, we all have to get M.Divs in order to do this training. But then once we do, we have to be able to step out of the certainty of our belief. So we all have to be endorsed by some kind of religious body. So I'm endorsed, but then part of my call when I am with a patient is for me to step back from whatever belief system, from my own belief about what is the meaning of humanity, what is the meaning of suffering, and to listen deeply to the patient and to hear what their meaning-making frame is, to find out what it is that gives them purpose, that sustains them. And it's not always going to be in God language. So any presumptions that I may have about I'm going in to talk about Jesus or God or Allah, that is not my assumption. My assumption is that this person is going to teach me what gives them meaning, what gives them hope, what inspires them and sustains them. And that for me to let go of my certainty, because I think we all have a sense that my truth is the truth, that there's a certain, absoluteness or rightness to it. And that is, to me, it's the way that we got stretched early on in the training. But so since then, it has been lots of patients and lots of students over the years where it's an ongoing task of letting go of what I think I know and letting myself be taught by the person before me.
So what does this process look like at the institution where you are, Atrium Health Mercy? How do you go about educating healthcare providers in this not so well-known discipline? Do you have classes? Are they compulsory? Are they voluntary? What does this process look like?
Well, the process for people who want to become chaplains is a process that is very much focused on case studies, on writing up verbatims of patient visits, of getting feedback in a small peer group, as well as giving feedback to each other about how you experience each other. Because one of the things that we find is that we don't often have group experiences where people will give us honest feedback about, if you said this to me, I would feel it was kind of presumptuous, or I would feel intruded upon, or and that kind of feedback is very much part of the education. Now, that's what we do with our own students. We also do other kinds of education with our multidisciplinary teams, with providers. We do a chaplain grand rounds, where we will address topics around finding meaning at the end of life, topics around suffering. In my particular healthcare system right now, there's a huge focus on what we call Code Lavender. If you were to see me this afternoon, Randy, unlike many providers that are wearing white lab coats, our team all wears lavender. We have a focus on a Code Lavender response.
What a great idea!
Well, and it's
You're
certainly
recognizable.
Everybody, yes, they can tell from wherever we are that is our role, and that we're there to respond when there has been some kind of, maybe not physical injury, but maybe a moral injury. Certainly workplace violence is a hot topic in healthcare today. And our providers, our nurses, our therapists are often experiencing either verbal, physical. There's all kinds of violence that is really being pushed out by both patients and occasionally by teammates. So our role is then to provide a response that reaches out, and as much as we might show up, part of our role is then to invite a listening space. One of the things I think is kind of interesting is I remember reading not too long ago the whole idea of narrative medicine, which I think is such an interesting topic, and there's really good stuff written about the whole narrative medicine model. And that's very much what we, that our focus on narrative and storytelling and story listening, those are the tools that we use. I had an educator early on say to me, we do not have, as chaplains, we don't have stethoscopes. We don't have, breathing ventilators or other kinds of respirators, but we have our personhood, and that what we walk into the room with is our capacity to be present, and to be present in a way that invites a sacred sharing of who that person is, with the conviction that they will be honored.
This is really fascinating, and I think I could literally listen to you talk about this for hours, but we would probably lose a bit of our audience along the way. But anyway, before we bring the conversation to a close, there is one thing that I'm really curious about because of recent events, and I'd like to hear you talk about your experience with ministry to caregivers and some of the experiences that you had during the COVID epidemic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this was something that we have not experienced since the beginning of the 20th century. So nobody really had any firsthand experience with what do we do when this kind of thing is going on. So tell me how it was for you at Atrium Mercy.
Mercy has had a long history of being a fairly small community hospital. And so there was a sense of people who had worked here for a long time and a coming together as a community, as a group that would watch out for each other. Our respiratory therapists were just phenomenal. They were a group that, of course, was at the front line of this whole. And so for us to just pay such close attention to them, because we never stopped as chaplains going into the patient rooms. I mean, that was not, I know in some places they did, but I remember thinking that this could be it, because when I think back to, I was around during the kind of early part of the AIDS epidemic, and there was a lot of mystery about, how you catch it, how, do you recover from it or not? And this sense of not being that sure about whether exposure was going to be the end of you, and having to come to some sense of peace with, yes, this might be the time that is going to threaten my life and threatens all of us. And we're very much a team that works closely together. I mean, among both our administration, our administrators were very much present in the midst of this and very visible. And our physicians, when people would go out sick, there was a sense of how do we help each other? How do we be present to each other? And when we had a number of deaths, we have a beautiful garden that is part of our hospital. It's we call our healing garden. And because it was outside, that was one of the safe places we could go. And so we often took people, we took patients outside. We would have services outside. And one of the things I remember most was that we had so many patients that couldn't go home because they didn't have a safe place to go, and they were with us for a long time, and they'd been sick for a long time. And so we would get some help to wheel them all downstairs. And I have a music therapist that's part of my group, and he would do music, and we would have people spread out far enough so that they could safely sing in their own space or clap. And I think, I guess it's a long answer to say we found ways to be a community because the isolation was one of the worst things about COVID.
Oh, yeah.
And finding a way to be together. That was what we had to do.
Well, it really sounds like you did it well. And of course, I've heard lots of stories. In some places, it wasn't done so well, but congratulations to you and your team for doing what sounds like you got it right. I hope you feel good about that because it would certainly be deserving. Terri, I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm serious when I say I could go on for hours and hours. This is just so fascinating to me and so different from the people that I usually get to talk to, who are usually much more clinical. And I've truly enjoyed it. I think I've been blessed, and I appreciate you being here. At this point, I'm going to close my mic, and we're going to do what we came here to do, and that's hear you speak on your own. So, audience, this is Chaplain Terri Bolotin to deliver her personal prescriptions for success.
Well, thank you. Well, as I thought about where I seek my advice and inspiration, I have always sought it from people who have defied single categories, from those who have defied labels. And I found that spirituality was something that was more than just a yes or no. I have been inspired by the people who are the mystics, the poets, the healers among all my educators. I was always drawn to people who ask questions. And I was inspired by that. The best piece of advice that I got was that whenever I become too deeply enamored of a certain truth, of something I considered the deep truth, that I should then pause and consider how the opposite of that truth also contains truth, that every truth in some degree has paradox. And if it was early 2014, I would tell myself to stop scrolling, to take frequent cyber holidays. I would regularly plan a vacation that I could spend lots of time planning and dreaming about. I'm looking forward to going on a hike of the Camino this next year. I would tell myself to avoid the ever-attractive breadth of stuff, clamoring for attention, and go deeper into what matters most. That is my prescription for success.
Well, I'm not surprised that that's really loaded with wisdom, Terri, and I really appreciate you sharing with us. I enjoy all of the interviews that we do on this program, but I have to admit, this is going to go in the books as one of my favorites, and I thank you so much for being here. Before we go, I want you to please let our audience know where they can find you, find more about you. If you'd like to share email addresses, Facebook handles, whatever you have, please do so.
Well, thank you. I am at Atrium Health Mercy in Charlotte, North Carolina, and Terri.Bolotin at atriumhealth.org. It's been a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you so much for listening today. If you enjoyed the show, you can help us reach more listeners by leaving a rating and a review, especially on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And if your app doesn't have that option, just leave us an email or a voicemail through SpeakPipe at www.rxforsuccesspodcast.com. You can also help by becoming a Patreon member. That link is in the show notes. And we hope you'll also follow our companion podcast, Life-Changing Moments with Dr. Dale Waxman. Special thanks to our producer, Craig Clausen, our promotions manager, Mariana Rodabaugh, and to Ryan Jones, who created and performs our theme music. And remember, be sure to fill your prescription for success with my next episode.